Welcome back. In our previous episodes, we talked a lot about dreams, living your dreams, not being afraid to start something new, and following your heart, following the path that you think is right for you. And today I am extremely honored to be interviewing my Aunt Ginny about her journey with just that, about starting something new, being innovative, following, each step, sometimes without knowing, what the long-term picture might look like, but believing in what you're doing in the moment. So welcome, Ginny.
Thanks. Good to be here with you, Jenna.
Thank you. And I like to have a couple questions about just kind of getting to know you first before we jump into your particular story about your business. And so one is asking you just what is something that you love and why? Not necessarily a person, but a thing. What's something that you love?
Oh, I think this was one of those questions that I had a little bit. There's so many things I love,
Well, feel free to.
And I would say that the reason there's so many things I love is because I love those moments in time where, something like you just see through whatever your daily routine or your frustration is, and you just see something beautiful,
Beautiful and joyful.
Yeah. So, it happens on my walks down by the river. I love seeing the eagles overhead when they come right over near our house. And I'm always in awe of that when I see them. I love seeing, sometimes there's like other critters in our backyard.
Yeah.
I've come face to face with coyotes, which has been really exciting.
In your backyard?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And in the middle of the city, things like that. And it's a beautiful sunset. It's I think I'm listing a lot of things from nature because I think those are some of the things that are really like. But it's also like those moments with my grandkids when we're just like squirreling around and having fun, my youngest grandson is playing basketball right now, and he plays the whole game with this grin on his face because he loves the game so much. I love seeing that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Those are some of the things that just like kind of keep me going.
I'm grateful that you shared that because I think, when people talk about sometimes like loss or not being able to have certain moments anymore, you would give anything, to have some of those very moments again, whether it's just playing basketball or, if you maybe move to a new place and you don't have that connection to nature that you did before. I think those particular moments are sometimes things people don't recognize until maybe like it's too late, So I think it's really beautiful that you're recognizing them now while you have them. And I can relate too, I have a busy life with all of my kids.
Yes.
And those moments though with each individual one where I really kind of see them and appreciate whatever the joy of the moment is really powerful. And nature too, I think is really, really important. And I try to, even when it's cold out, like get out for a walk at least once a day. And I can relate to seeing those things. So I appreciate that you
And I
shared
think
that.
when you take the time to just that moment of appreciation, they burn in your brain and you remember them. If you don't, you miss it, you know? But like I now that I'm older, I have we used to sail Lake Superior. I have so many memories of amazing times up on that lake. Out in the middle of the lake in the middle of the night with just the stars and double rainbows, and I mean just that just being out on that lake was an amazing experience for me for 13 years, and I can't do that anymore. But I have so many of those memories that I can just pull right up in my and just remember those moments, and they still sustain me.
And those memories probably allow for you to create similar moments, maybe in a different environment, but that's probably what motivates you. I'll say one more thing. I talk a lot on this podcast about the work of Ed Milet. He's a pretty big entrepreneur, but he shares also about some of his psychological development, and he talks a lot about sort of the neuroscience of your emotional home, right? Whatever feeling it is that you're familiar with, and it can be some of the hard ones like fear, anger, whatever it might be. You're going to find a way to feel that. And so I'm really glad that you brought up how you felt in all these beautiful moments in nature, because you can train your body to seek and feel those things too. If you make your emotional home, peace, joy, serenity, you're going to find a way to feel that all the time. And
Absolutely.
so I'm glad you spoke to that.
Absolutely. And in my line of work, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it was my job to be the one who showed up holding that space.
Oh.
And holding that energy so that a group that I worked with, the many groups that I worked with who were going through change, crisis, conflict, that there's an energy to help hold them to move through that.
Yeah.
And if I can't show up grounded in that place, then I can't be of help.
Right. Well, okay. Are you okay if we use that as the natural transitioning point then?
Sure.
I know there were maybe some other things we were going to touch on, but we could do it at the end. But are you comfortable just sharing what your business was, kind of on that note?
Sure. So my business comes under like an umbrella that's called organization development.
Okay.
Nobody really knows what that is, except people who do that work. So it's, for like my own family couldn't tell you what I did for a living, but
right.
But because it's not, it's like often it's kind of invisible work.
Okay.
But if you do this work and you're good at it, people will call you in to do it because they hear your name and they know you can get certain results. And so the kinds of things that I did was almost always working with groups. Could be team, could be a business, could be a nonprofit. A lot of nonprofit work as I went further into my career, and even communities who were going through some kind of crisis or change. And often it was around purpose. Often it was around, things are changing and we're not being successful anymore. We don't have a direction anymore, or we don't know where we're going, or the world around us has gone into chaos and what we're doing isn't working. And so some point like that, and that would be the point where I would get called to say, and oftentimes people would be asking for something like an assessment or leadership work or work with my team, or a lot of times it was under the banner of strategic planning, like we need a new strategy, we need a new direction. And sometimes it was under like our organization is like in crisis, can you come in and help us figure out what to do? And so that would be what I would do. And so I would go in and, begin to work with people around, first of all, mapping the territory, like, well, what do we got here?
Yeah.
But my work was not to come in as an expert. I think a lot of people, there are people who work in my field who come in as experts and they assess and tell you what to do. That's not the way I do my work or did my work. I would come in as a partner and we would collectively try to understand, to maybe get at what's really at the source or heart, or what's the leverage point. I often use the imagery of bowling. So you got a bunch of pins down there and you're trying to figure out how to make some shift happen. If you hit the right pin, you can knock a lot of stuff down. If you hit the wrong pin, not much changes. So it was like a lot of times trying to figure out where is the leverage point in here where we can begin to really shift what's happening that isn't working, and how can we help you find what's trying to emerge, what's trying to happen here that's good and healthy for your whole system.
Okay. I think it's great that you came in as a partner, because I could see people, and maybe sometimes they still were, being resistant to somebody kind of coming in and saying they're in charge now, so I think coming in alongside them is great, because your end goal was also getting them to function on their own too. So you kind of had to identify
You're right.
Their strengths and what they needed and where to build.
And the success is when you walk away and they can sustain a new change. So the goal is to get out. The goal is to come in and help them gain strength so that they can do what they need to do. And and not to, and oftentimes there's an old, I think it's a saying from Lao Tzu, who said, the greatest leader is the one where the people say we did it ourselves.
Yes.
And so if people develop the capacity to work together and figure things out themselves, that's really what I was aiming for. And so my work was a lot about participatory practices, like processes and putting together a process. And I didn't come in with a canned process, but I studied a lot of organizational process so that I could put something together to say, oh, here's where you guys are. This seems to be like a good fit for what, and because people need to be able to break stuff down into steps. It's like when we're going through change, it gets overwhelming. It feels big. And in the old way of doing things, we used to try to plan like 5-year strategies, which quite honestly, the world's going to be a different world in 5 years. So if you think you're going to have a strategic plan, those don't work. But what does work is when we really begin to get to sit together and to create shared meaning, shared identity, shared direction, and we learn how to do that with one another. And so that was a lot of the work that I did, was around working with groups who are always skeptical, who almost never understood at sort of a intellectual level what I was trying to do, but building relationships of trust, helping people to understand. There was like many moments of magic in my work where I saw groups do amazing things. So
yeah, I think you made a really powerful statement that I'm going to try to paraphrase just to make sure people hear it, and correct me if I butcher it, but it's not so much the strategic 5-year plans that work, but it's coming together and finding a shared identity and purpose in the moment and seeing where you want to build now.
Yes. And so, so if you have a sort of shared sense of identity and purpose, then, maybe you get an action plan for the next 6 months or maybe a year, depending, but you can start to move in the direction. And then the other piece of the work is about how do we reflect and how do we keep learning? We don't do a very good job of that in most organizations. We don't create space for people to actually reflect on how it's going and to be really honest with ourselves, and so that sense of, how are we going to know if we're successful? What are we going to see or not see if we aren't? What are we going to, how are we going to redirect if we need to? And when, how are we going to do that? How are we going to, I started doing in many groups a lot of what's called scenario planning, because the world is changing so fast. It's like, well, what are 3 scenarios that we might encounter in the future? Which one of those would we really like to see happen? But how do we plan for a future that's uncertain? How do we plan for a future that's changing? Those were other kinds of ways we had to think. So I feel like if I did my work well, I was actually influencing how people thought about things and saw the world, and it became less important what you had on the paper. And what really became important is, could we do strategic thinking together? Could we actually find ways to cross our differences, to talk to one another about what's important? Could we hold conflict and the messiness of how to be together in a way that we could move forward?
I feel like every business needs you and needs that, because I think one thing that people worry about, I certainly did in the working world, is hidden agendas, people having different motivations for why they're doing what they're doing. And so creating that trust and sort of shared responsibility, I think, is so powerful. Are you comfortable giving a specific example? And you don't have to, of course, say the business's name or anything, just for the sake of anybody out there who might be trying to start a business or reframe their business or organization. It doesn't have to be business. It could be some sort of volunteer organization or anything where you're working with a team with a common goal. Would you be comfortable sharing some of the practical pieces of what you did for the businesses. So like if they were going to try to speak about, you know, a shared vision or connect with that, what would that look like? Maybe a particular weekly meeting with a singular focus, or how would you do it, I guess, if you're comfortable going there?
Yeah, boy, and this is, I think, why it's hard to understand the work, because I don't think I ever did the same thing twice. I might have had similar processes, but they were always so customized, you know. But I think
sorry, can I pause really quick and say, I think that actually in itself is a really good way to go about it. And I can relate with my teaching work. I never taught anything the same way twice, because it was customized for who you're working with. And so although there might be a framework and a goal, I do want to point out for those listening that it's okay to customize as needed, and to pay attention to who you're working with and what works for them. And that's what continues to help you grow as the professional too, is constantly finding those new and creative ways. So I just wanted to point out, I think that in itself is a good approach for conducting business.
I think that's sort of what separates the novice person in their field from a person who builds more mastery, is that a novice can get really stuck on doing the process the way I've been taught to do the process, you know. And I do my work, I would also say it was a lot of group facilitation. And I know a lot of group facilitators, and the good ones don't get hooked on their own process and don't force people to do something even if the energy is not there for the group. So I mean, I'll give you an example of a group that I worked with, I won't name it, and we were doing a planning process, and we were at the end of the day, and this is often when it happens, where somebody threw a bomb into the meeting and said, you know, well, we are, you know, we have, you know, essentially we are not practicing, you know, the things that we're trying to do in the world. And it was about, we're racist here, you know, yeah. So that's a pretty big bomb to throw in to a team at the end of a meeting. And so I'm a facilitator, and we're trying, and I've been contracted to help them, you know, have this plan. But what good is a plan going to do, I'm asking myself, when they've just blown up as a group? You know, they're not on the same page, so they're not going to carry out any kind of plan we might try to like rush together here. So
can I ask really quick what the reactions of the other folks in the meeting were to that? Did they seem in agreement, or were they kind of quiet and awkward, or
all
did
of
people
the above?
Get mad?
There were people who were frustrated because we're at the end of the day and they're the task people and we got to get the task done. And there are people who were like shocked and, you know, like just emotionally, you know, who feel things. And the feelers were, you know, kind of, there was people who were shocked and pulled back. There were people who were like saying, yeah, it's finally time we put this on the table. So you have, in a group, you have all that going on at the same time. And so then I'm, as a facilitator, trying to decide what to do. And they're all looking to me, right? So, you know, what I found as a facilitator that is really important is to speak the truth to the group. So what I just said to the group is, okay, we came together to do this, you know, plan, and this is something that is being brought that feels pretty important. So group, what do you want to do? Do you want to table this? Do you want to stay? Can you stay an extra whatever it takes to open this up and see what we're dealing with? What do you want to do? And the group actually came back and said, we think we need to stay and work this out. So we did.
Oh, wow.
And so we talked it out, and the group left in a good place. And so, but it's like if I had, you know, I think, you know, if you're not really paying attention to the group and what's going on, and you're uncertain, and you, like we talked earlier, you're not centered in yourself, and you're not able to say to the group, you know, okay, here's what's going on, then, you know, you might try to rush that group through. It would not be successful. They would not feel like they got what they needed, and they would probably blame you.
No, you're probably right. You're the
and you don't. Then you get the reputation of somebody who can't do good strategic planning. When in fact, it wasn't about that at all. It was about people coming together and having this really important conversation that I think must have been and had been simmering probably, but I didn't know the group well enough to know that because I was in my first time, I think, maybe with this group. And so, groups have, and you talk about hidden agendas, groups have hidden agendas, people have hidden agendas. Stuff blows up all the time. And, some of it is, and we have hidden agendas because we have, needs that maybe aren't getting met. We have power dynamics that we don't necessarily know, if we have voice or we have agency in a particular situation.
Right.
People don't like to talk about conflict. They don't like to talk about, people do not want to speak truth to power. We know this. We're seeing it all over the country right now. So, so that's the reality of kind of what I see as human nature. And so when a group comes together and I'm working with them, what I'm trying to do is also build safety for people to be able to say their truth. And I feel like that example I just gave you was a huge success because people spoke their truth, and they did it and they came together and they held it so that they could transform that into a stronger working relationship with one another.
Wow. Okay. So I have a couple questions kind of built off of that then. One, would you be able to say how you made that safe space? How did you create that environment where people did feel safe enough to express the truth?
Boy, I think there are so many little things, and there are also things that we know, like, you talk about, like, we have certain things we learn in our profession, right, about what to do. Like in a classroom, you learn, how to structure things in a certain way. In my work, some of it is about really helping people get clear about why they're there and staying on purpose. So having a clear shared purpose, I think, is really important. I think creating space for all voices to be heard, and as a facilitator, that's one of your most important responsibilities, is to, stop for the people who don't speak and, invite them, not force people if they don't have something to say, but, we tend to, in groups, have certain people who dominate because they're more verbal, they might have more power, and then other people get quiet and don't say anything. And so, one of the tricks of the trade is early on in the meeting, make sure there's a space, make sure every voice gets in. We have ways to manage, I think sometimes letting people know, like, what's happening in the group and how it's going to happen. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to cover these things in this meeting. This is where we hope to end up. And, we will end up there if we all do this.
Okay.
It's not my job to, get you there. And so I'm not going to, and I think also being able to say to a group, we might not stay exactly on time. My goal is to help you end on time and to make, that was one thing I did feel responsible as a facilitator, because it always drove me nuts when meetings went on and on. First of all, I had a background in music, and it drove me nuts when, it's like a good meeting is almost like a good performance of a piece, There's a rhythm to it, there's an energy to it, there's highs and lows, and there's a resolution. And so even if you don't get everything done, ending a meeting on time with here's our next steps, here's where we're going. I felt very strongly that was my job in working with groups. And so, the topics can change, the purposes of coming together can change, but then there's the skill of how to guide a group through a meeting.
That was actually going to be my next question, is how did you find that balance? Because I know kind of from experience in my classroom that there is a balance between creating a safe space where people can speak the truth and express themselves, but also knowing when somebody is kind of just dragging the conversation in a direction that maybe isn't the purpose anymore. It becomes about something else. So how did you balance that? How did you keep the conversation kind of on goal, safe at the same time?
Yeah. Boy, it's a lot of work. And
Yes,
the funny thing is, it's sort of like invisible work. People actually don't see what you're doing when you're doing that. They know they feel it if it's successful, and they feel it if it's not successful, but most people probably couldn't tell you what a good facilitator does to help that happen.
Yeah.
Because it's because you're paying attention to different things. So, in a group, I always felt like there's content, there's a layer of content and goal, that we're trying to get to. That's like the task layer, and that's important. That's, if you don't pull that off, you're not going to get very, very far, But there's also an experience that people are having, and you have to pay attention to that experience as well, especially if you want people to come out the other end like all ready to go forward and do the thing. Like how many times are you in a meeting and people people walk out of the meeting and they have totally different perceptions of what happened.
Yeah.
And they're on different pages about what they're going to do.
Absolutely.
Like that happens all the time. So, good meeting facilitation is that you try to make sure that people are, like that you're bringing people with you. You're stopping, you're taking moments at time to say, let's just take a moment here and can we just hear from everybody? What are you hearing? What are we missing? It's taking time at the end of major sections of a meeting or a project to say, let's stop and reflect on how we're doing. Are we getting what we need here, or are we not? Those are process checks, and so having a really good handle and a good set of ways to do process checks, to check in with people and see how they are, checking in with people on breaks. I mean, when I used to work those kinds of big meetings, I never took a break, because every break that people are taking, I was checking in with people on break to see what's really going, and people will tell you.
That's the perfect time to do it, because it's fresh in their minds too.
And they're walking away from a meeting and they're thinking, and so you just walk up over the coffee and say, how's this going for you? What are you getting what you need? What are we missing? So you're constantly checking in with people and constantly focusing on those two levels. And what I think is in the work that I do, one of the reasons I think it's invisible is most people are paying attention to the content.
Right.
That's it. They aren't paying attention to the process or the feelings of what's going, or the energy in the room, or what's the hidden agendas, or all of that stuff. Those don't get paid attention to. People, they just know their own. And so when I did projects, I did some projects with people, like I worked with 3M research scientists doing strategic planning, and you would ask me, like, how could you possibly do that? Like, I don't have a science degree, I don't have a background in science. And they were very skeptical, I have to add, about me coming into doing this because I wasn't a scientist. But when we did a 3-day planning session with on one of these research teams, and the biggest compliment I got at the end of the meeting was from one of my biggest skeptics, who didn't think I should be there, who said, "You really understand what we do." And I almost had to laugh, because I'm like, I really don't, but
but I do.
But I do, because my science is different than your science. You're thinking about chemistry and the chemistry and then all of the other things related to the business of trying to create a product in that area. I'm thinking about, how are you working together? Are you listening to each other? And I did have to learn a lot of stuff in my work, because every place I went into had a different content. But I think I learned how to learn enough content to know what they were trying to achieve without having to know all the details of their work, because I could have never done that and worked with all the different groups that I did. But I'm then paying attention to other things, like, how are you, do you have a sense of, direction? Do you understand the problems that are facing you, and I had to know enough about the work to know what help them articulate those problems. But that was a lot of the work. And then keeping people on purpose, like, what are we here to do? What are you here to do? Yeah.
Well, I think I can say a couple things. I think I understand what it is that you did, so organizational development. It's like it tells you what it is and not at the same time. It sounds like, you were, would it be fair to say a consultant?
I was a consultant. I would say consultant, facilitator, coach, kind of all together, if that makes sense. And designer, because we had to design processes. Because a lot of the projects that I did were longer term. They were some of them were multi-year, some of them were multi-organization. So they could be big and complex, and they needed a lot of for example, I did a project with the Minnesota court system to study, to get a group of people across the state from all different kinds of related organizations to the legal profession to look at how the Minnesota civil court system was working and how well it was working and what could be done to make it a better system.
Wow.
And that project took over a year and involved we had a task force of about 20 some people from all different organizations that came together monthly, and we put a plan together for how to study the system. And then we also involved community members and created several large group meetings where people came in. And I did a lot of those kind of projects. I did them with the state health department, looking at issues of health issues for women, specifically looking at domestic abuse and sexual abuse and teenage health issues across the state of Minnesota. So they're
So you helped them with how they managed some of those concerns, or how did you help them with the abuse part of it?
Well, some of them were like taking an issue and looking at like how is the whole system working or not working to help address these issues for people in our state, for women in our state. So it would be looking at, so we would do these kind of, these kind of bringing in data, first of all, to say, how are we doing in the system? And then helping groups of people who are all working around that system, who all have a little piece of the puzzle, but who are all in sort of working in their own silos. And so how do we get people to learn about the whole system, what's really going on across the system, and then to create some common directions of what we think would help that system work more effectively.
Okay. Wow. I had no idea you did all of that work, but it's just the more that you speak, the more that I'm sitting here thinking everybody needs this. And so I think the teacher in me, but also for the sake of my listeners, I want to summarize, because I think I understand, just at a very simple level. You were a consultant, designer, what was another word that you used? Facilitator for organizations, could be as big as state legal organizations or nonprofits. I mean, really any group that needed help with communication and common purpose and their goals and staying on track with where they needed to be. But also, and I think the really important part is creating that sort of healthy, safe environment where people really can grow professionally, but also grow their business or make their business more efficient. Would you say that's...
Yes, and I would say a common denominator across all of the work is being in a moment of change or transformation, or a moment of time in which we need to be doing something different. Because if we're being successful, you probably don't need somebody you don't need this work,
right?
But we live in a time where lots is changing, and I would say probably that's what most people are facing and dealing with most of the time today, is just changing conditions, changing times, and how do we make those shifts happen? And a lot of times we aren't maybe talking to each other in the way we need to be, or we need designs for, we need to come together, and how do you make that happen, and how do you do that well so that it doesn't blow up. And so I think that that idea of managing change, leading change, is a big piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And learning to, you kind of made me think of something I learned way back in my college days in my communications classes. I learned that the most cohesive, productive groups are those that have a healthy balance between the task and social. And social specifically, like social where it's not just a couple people dominating or who get along, but the whole group feels connected and you work in that sort of cohesive way. And I think, as you were speaking too, I think that many groups do not necessarily value how people are feeling or all perspectives. You might have, or they're just so center focused on the task of, let's just get this done and do the next thing, that they miss out on it. But it sounds like from what you're saying that the groups that in the end, have the best product or stay on purpose and expand are those who actually learn that balance, who actually learn how to value the voices of others and how to identify their purpose. It all kind of works together. Is that correct to say?
Yes, and I think you nailed it when you said, I think that the work is about having the kind of relationships where we can do this work together. We don't have to love each other, but it really helps if we do.
Or at least we're coming to the table authentically.
We're coming to the table authentically, and we're building trust, and we're listening. We're really listening to each other. And I had a large group. It was one of these big projects I was describing. Like, it wasn't the legal project, but a different one. And we had a series of meetings with about 50 people in the room. And it became clear, and we did some really powerful things to try to help people really look at, how they were feeling about this system, how they were feeling about their work and others, because there was a lot of frustration. And we got to the end of a 2-day meeting, and there was the people who we were trying to serve in this system were in the room. I knew they were frustrated. I knew there was huge amounts of, but we weren't saying anything. So one of the things I did is, I said to the group at the end of the day, I feel like there's an elephant in the room, and that we're not talking about the elephant in the room. And I used to carry a bag of stuff, and one of the things I had was a stuffed elephant.
Oh, wow. That's great, though.
Because sometimes a visual is really useful. So I put that elephant in the room, and I said, I think we can't move very much further forward until we can speak to the elephant in the room. So I'd like you to go home tonight and think about what you think needs to be said here that hasn't been said.
Oh, wow.
And in the morning, we're going to come back and we're going to start there.
Wow.
Wasn't in our plan, wasn't in our design. It broke the group open. We came, and with a microphone and 50 people, we went around the circle, and people said things that were, it was amazing.
Wow.
And that shifted things and made it possible for us to keep moving. And this work is hard work. I came to doing it over so many years. It doesn't always end well. We don't always end up with what we hope. We might take a few steps forward, but we may not get every direction forward. It's really hard. It's especially this cross system work where people get caught up in their own priorities in their own organization, and they don't want to make the changes that might make the whole system better, or the money doesn't follow that, so they don't feel like they have the resources to do that, or there's just a lot of things systemically that are barriers. So you do the best you can, and you learn, and you keep finding things that can help, and I think I don't, it's I always wanted to see change happen quicker, but I think I came to see that sometimes it's like one or two things, or it's like just people hearing each other, like that meeting where everybody heard the perspectives around the table was extremely powerful, and it begins to sort of break down your own wall of how you see the world. So.
Yeah, it sounds like you have to kind of just be willing to, well, be vulnerable. But I've come to learn in my own journey that without vulnerability, there's no reward, and just accepting that things may not go the way that you expected or as quickly as expected, but any shift can create other powerful shifts,
Yes.
So I think even if they were starting from a place of, okay, we're just listening to each other, that can change everything, and it will. So it sounds really beautiful. And I was wondering if we can go backwards a little bit to
Sure.
kind of how did you start this business? How did you think to do this? What led you to it? So let's maybe start there and then talk about some of the practical pieces. But just how did you realize you wanted to do this work?
Yeah. Well, I had started working in, my first kind of major career was working in human resources in a business and in a couple of businesses. And I think another one of those like crisis moments where I just realized in that work, I was not in a great situation. I was in a job where I was overworked and it was insane. It was just not a great environment, and it was like a job that I had a lot of responsibility in. It was the second time I'd been in a company where I felt like I was just in a crazy system that I just, for many reasons. I was a woman entering a leadership role at a time when women were new to leadership, and so there was all of that issue to deal with.
Yeah.
And there was, I won't even get into all that, but what I will say is that I reached a point where it was like, if I just take another job to get away from this job, it's probably as likely that I'm going to recreate the same situation that I walked out of. That what I really need to be doing is walking towards what I want. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted. I knew this wasn't it, but I didn't know. So I stayed in a job that I wasn't really thrilled with, but I started a practice of every day reflecting, every day, like what sort of brought me joy, what did I love in this work, and what was de-energizing. So sort of what was energizing, what was de-energizing. And I started a journey for myself of saying, okay, I want to find what it is that I love to do. And lots of magical things unfolded that year, in which I discovered a field I didn't even know existed, organization development.
Yeah.
And it was like, and it built on the work that I was already doing in organizations, but it was, rather than working like in human resources where you're sort of like the keeper of these systems that I felt were actually not very healthy systems.
Right.
I wanted to work in changing the system, and so I found the field, and then I started a journey of about 3 years of what I called my downwardly mobile professional phase, or being a dumpy. And it was I took jobs that were kind of like lateral moves, and even like and I found a graduate school that I wanted to go to study organization development. I had kids. I was supporting my family. I needed, like, it was not like it was an easy thing, but I negotiated to work part-time and earn less money, 4 days a week instead of 5, so that I could do 1 day a week of school. And this was a program for adults working in the field. And
okay,
so I did. I went and got a master's degree in organization development, which really helped because, and it not only helped, but then when I was finished with my master's, I was looking for work either internally inside an organization like a business. I didn't find anything I really wanted. But my colleagues, who were in the program with me, which was for adults working in all across the country, started hiring me for projects.
Wow.
So I then negotiated. I had this is kind of this is maybe a long story, so I don't know if you want to hear all this.
No, I do, but can we pause for just
Yeah.
a second? Because you said a couple powerful things that I want to make sure the listeners noticed. Number one, when you were back working in HR, that sort of awareness that, okay, if I just leave this job and get another job in HR, I'm just going to recreate the same system. I think that's really powerful because sometimes people think, oh, I just need to switch companies. And sometimes it works. It might be a good company, but I think more often than not, the truth that you just spoke is the case where you just end up in a very similar situation, kind of working inside a machine that's not something that where with values that maybe don't match yours. And I think also you shared the beautiful practice of starting with just being aware of what gives you energy and what drains your energy, so that kind of gave you direction for where you wanted to go, and everything sort of built on each other. And so I think that's a really important point to notice, is just the seemingly simple act of paying attention to what gives you energy and what doesn't is a really big clue about what direction you might want to move in. And then it sounds like it was just step after step. Then you discovered the field. Like once you kind of had a sense of what you valued, then you discovered the field of organizational development and the educational programs that went along with that, and found a way to make it work with supporting your family, working, school, all
right.
of it.
And I think a lot of people that I know of also, right, that I've met over the years who ask me about this are so afraid to take a step back and earn less money and lose their career path and all of that, or step out of a leadership role or something, to make, and I think, you know, you have to be willing to let go also of what isn't working, and sometimes you have to take a step back. So I was in, you know, just in a practical sense, I was cutting my income like every year for like 3 years, and I was going to school and I was taking less work, and I was making it, but when I finally went out and started my own business, I doubled my income in 1 year.
Wow.
So I kind of, you know, I did this arc of going down, down, and then I just popped up. And I think people don't think, you know, it's like you have to be willing to think outside the box.
Yeah.
That, you know, there is those possibilities. And I mean, but you take risks, and you have to have courage of, you know, saying, well, this is, you know, what I'm going to do.
I'm glad you shared that there was a dip for a while. And sometimes I feel like people would want to quit in a dip. Like, oh no, this is too hard. I'm not, you know, because they want the results right away. And it is hard. But if you can get through that hard, then like you said, you doubled your income. And it's very clear based on what you've said so far, you did something you loved for the rest of your, you know, working career. And
right.
You learned and you grew while doing it. And then were sought out by really big organizations. You were making change. I had no idea you worked for the state, you know, or consulted with the state. So that's pretty amazing. And then it's, you know, something I've actually talked about on here too is that I think sometimes people feel this pressure, or pressure is put on them of like, well, if you quit this or you don't do this, then what are you going to do? Or they get that pressure of that kind of 5-year plan sort of mentality of, well, how are you going to do this, and this? And people lay out all these overwhelming things. And I think sometimes it's okay to take a step when you don't have all of the answers. You know, when you know your next step, or you know the direction you want to go in, and you just kind of let the learning that you're doing and the habits that you're changing sort of form this new world for you.
Absolutely. That's so true, Jenna. Like, you know, you don't have to have it all figured out. You just need to take the next step. And the next and the next, and stay aware of and keep learning. You know, that year of reflection that I did was so helpful, because it built a practice of reflection to say, okay, you know, there have been times in my career, I had one not too long before I retired, well, a few years, where I was like, I was frustrated with almost everything. I was just frustrated with, you know, with where things were, and, you know, like I had created it, so I was going to have to change it. And I had this amazing dream. And you know, normally you don't get dreams that are like checklists, but I got one that just came in that said, your work needs to have these 5 things. And so I got up from that dream in the middle of the night and wrote it down, because like how often do you get a checklist in a dream? Like it's a really good thing. So and then I took that and I looked at my work the next day and all of my projects, and I said, you know what, all of the work I'm doing right now it meets some of these things, but nothing I'm doing meets all five. I'm gonna quit this and I'm gonna go for all five. And I did.
Yeah.
And so I mean, and that's hard. It's hard to quit something that's, like I had to learn to live for most of my career not knowing where my income was coming from more than 30 to 60 days out. Most people aren't willing to do that, and especially not when you're supporting a family. But what I also learned in my reflection is that if I step back, I could see that I may not know over 30 days or 60 days, but I kind of always was making my annual needs. So I'm like, okay, so I got to learn to trust that this is going to happen, and I got to learn to do the things that I know will bring work in and do those things.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It sounds like you had a good balance of that sort of faith and trust that it was going to happen, but you were taking steps too at the same time.
Yeah, you have to do that, like, and I didn't always have a work that I loved. I mean, I took some work that I didn't always love.
Yeah.
But I had to pay the bills, so you have to do that too.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up your dream, because I actually had an episode about that. So we do talk about on here actual dreams, that happen at night, and sometimes what that can tell us. But I also talked about my writing process, where part of how I was able to start writing more frequently was to not let any of my thoughts go. So just like you, in the middle of the night, somebody might think, oh, that was weird, and then just roll over and forget it. But you stopping in the middle of the night, being aware of that dream and feeling that there was something more there, and then writing it down, that was the start of something new. And that's really powerful too. And I've been trying to emphasize to my listeners not to take those moments that something is clear to us, or where we feel a really strong pull, not to take those for granted, not to let our thoughts go, to take our thoughts seriously and write them down. And
it's really important, and I've done that all my career. And it's amazing how you get a big dream, and that dream that I mentioned with the checklist, I changed within 2 months. Different projects were coming in that were really stimulating for me, and it sort of led me on a 10-year trajectory of the last 10 years of my career that I really felt like I was just in a flow of doing just the work that was mine to do.
Wow. It's all worth it. It sounds like it's worth everything, even the tough moments. Yeah. So I have one more question about kind of this process. How did you have skeptics when you were starting this work? Did you have people who kind of said, no, what are you doing? Go back to HR, or people who didn't really believe in what you were doing? Did you have skeptics?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. How did you deal with that? How did you kind of push past the criticism and stay true to what you knew was right for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think one of the things that I did is I had a business partner who had been a friend of mine, and one of my my roommate in my graduate program, and we formed a learning trio, and we became our support system for this work when we were starting off, I had that, and actually the three of us, we would meet to do learning together. We'd meet to support each other, and we did all kinds of things over the course of about 5 years. And out of that supportive friendship and learning friendship, we formed an organization for women leaders, and we started doing a year-long program for women leaders that ended up, it was our own nonprofit, the Center for Emerging Leadership. We did 20 years of retreats for women.
Wow.
To help other women learn how to follow their dreams, and how to come together and really do that deeper reflective work to say, what is the story I'm living versus what's the story I want to be living, and how do I begin to do that? And some of that was also about bringing women at a time who were coming into leadership work, but where the definition of leadership was, and pretty much still is, defined by a very sort of male patriarchal view of the world, and where women are very much in a catch-22 when they, try to do, do leadership work of any kind. And so it was, I think, a more of a peer mentoring kind of situation, and that's another whole story for maybe another whole podcast, but that work was really powerful, and it created and I still have such strong relationships with other women who, we learned how to support each other and how to be there for each other and help each other kind of believe in ourselves and not get caught in the external perceptions that are out there for us. And that's and I think we need that support. I think it's, I don't know if I could have had the courage to do a lot of the things that I did if I hadn't had the strength of, those women with their hands at my back.
That's beautiful. And it also kind of echoes some of the sentiments that I've talked about on here. I have a whole episode called The Closet, and and it's, it does kind of play on that whole concept. But I shared that I had a mentor who was very dear to me, and she was somebody who I would, when I was working in the school, so I would go and meet with regularly, and she believed in my ideas, I believed in hers, I learned from her, and I just liked being in her presence, and it helped me kind of deal with some of the negativity or rejection or unwarranted criticism that I was dealing with in other areas. And I even referenced the Obamas a little bit, because in both Michelle Obama's The Light We Carry book and a quote by Barack, they talk about you have, your people that kind of fill your cup, and it really does when you focus on thinking of them, and when you have that to kind of fill up, it makes it easier to bear some of the voices that maybe just want to drag you down. And I think that your support system of your female friends and colleagues is huge, not just for the fact that the three of you supported each other, but that you then expanded it to support other women. I think that gives it so much more power, and I think it's really beautiful that you did that. And it kind of fits with, like I said, some of the things we've talked about on here of how important it is, especially sometimes it can be easy to think, oh, nobody believes in me, or to get kind of caught up in that negativity cycle. But when you actively make the choice to think about the people who support you and to spend time with those people, it helps you stay on track with your goals, and kind of drowns out some of those other voices that maybe don't have a goal other than to just maybe feel superior by saying what you're doing isn't working, or even some well-intentioned people who just are trying to look out for you, but maybe that concern is misplaced. So I think that's wonderful. I wanted to ask, what advice would you give to somebody who's wanting to start something new, whether that's their own business or a career change or whatever it might be? What advice would you give to them?
Well, there's nuggets in what we've already talked about, but some other things that I've often told people when they've asked me that question is start where you are, like grow where you're planted. So, sometimes people, I think if I'm going to start something new, I have to do something like way out there. But there are always seeds right where you are that you can begin to find in your current job, or in an organization you're part of, or whatever. If there's something that you really love to do, go towards that, and just start to look and find some ways forward in it. So I did a lot of I started because I had these friendships at school of people, and they started to bring me in on projects. I did every year of my business, I did pro bono work. And the pro bono work was always about something I wanted to learn.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So like I could bring skills to some place and volunteer, and I could also build skills by doing that. So thinking about that reciprocity of how it's not always for money, it's sometimes about how do I help others out. And in that I learn, how to, I learn things that I take with me. So I think to be open to that kind of learning, and yeah, what else? What else could I say about that? Well, yeah, you do have to be practical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Like people have to eat, so I think it's like I think, I mean, there is, I think that the statistics still are probably that most new businesses fail. They don't last more than a couple of years, and so and I think some of that, one of the things that I often tell people is that when I had a consulting practice and I had to learn how to be a good consultant, I also had to learn how to run a business, my own business. A lot of people they forget about that. They want to do something, but they forget that it is, that if you're going to make a living at it, it is a business also. And it doesn't mean you have to get all caught up in making money as your primary thing. I mean, I think that'd be another piece of advice is like, I always figured out what my minimum was to meet my needs, and anything beyond that was a choice. And the choice was always about, do I need more money, or do I want to do this kind of work, or do I want time with my family? And what are my values, And so to sort of run a business that isn't trying to be, to make me wealthy, but just trying to be to do work I love to do. That was really what I wanted to do. And to provide for my family at the same time, and to be of service in the world. So like putting that together, that was where I really focused. So I think there is that practicality of, you have to, you have to have a budget, you have to market. Yeah, it takes time. I think some people also who want to start a business don't like to do all that stuff, and so they don't do it. I had friends in the consulting world who would just never invoice their clients because they didn't get around to it. And I'm like, invoicing is kind of how you get paid. So you got to have a system for that, right?
Well, that's what I was going to ask, actually, just really quick, practically. How did you get paid? How did you go about like setting your price and actually collecting the money, just for folks who might need some of that practical? How do you actually get that sort of transfer of money? How do you, how did you do that?
Well, I started as a business partnership with my friend and colleague and partner, who was also part of the women in leadership work that we did. And we formed a business entity. We set up a business plan. We figured out, what we needed, how we were going to, pool our money in the partnership, and make sure that we each got a fair percentage of that payout, which we ran that partnership for 20 years. And then I moved into taking over my husband's business entity and turning it into my business when we decided that we were going to go our separate ways in our partnership. Okay. So we did those things that we knew you needed to do. We worked on figuring out what kind of work we were going to do. We were going to get our clients from. We put together, we didn't have as traditional of a marketing plan because we were consultants. So we weren't making a product and selling a product per se, like we were selling a service, let's say. So that's a different kind of business. I have to laugh because we had both been managers in companies where we had managed $1 million plus budgets, right? And then when we started our business, we were keeping our finances on the back of napkins. And then we just looked at each other like, what are we doing? Like we used to run budgets. We need a business budget, like just simple things like that, because you have to know that if you're going to be doing something that is yours, that a service or a product or whatever, you have to have a business structure for, and I had an assistant for almost all of my part-time, very part-time sometimes, assistant who'd send out my invoices, and I kept track of my expenses, and I had to do taxes, and I had to figure out how to price a project. That was huge for me, because I'm doing work that's really hard sometimes to know what, it's like if you have a product, you can price out your margins and figure out what you have to make on that product. But if you're a consultant and you're selling a service, and you have and initially I'd oftentimes put in twice or three times the hours that I had priced that project for, because I didn't realize how much time it was going to take to do all the background prep work. So I had to learn how to do that so that I wasn't underpricing myself. And I had to learn to sort of gulp at the fee that I was asking people for.
Yeah.
And as a woman, I think it was harder for me sometimes to ask for those bucks than I think it was for my male friends who were, my colleagues. So I had to get over that and learn to value myself and what I was doing and price it accordingly. And then, as I got more successful, I learned how to say, you know what, I want to do this kind of work with nonprofits. They don't have the same money to work with, so I'm going to have a price for my nonprofit work that I think they can afford, even though I know I could make more if I worked. I could make 3 times as much if I worked for a business, but that's not the work that I felt was my purpose work. So
yeah, it sounds like you're doing a lot of the same things that you would advise your clients to do, which is constantly reflecting and learning and identifying your purpose, but also your financial goals, making sure you're working with the right people who share your values, who you can have open communication with. I mean, a 20-year partnership, that's pretty powerful. I don't know that many people can say they've had that, and so I think that that's really great that you're sort of also embodying the things that you would advise your clients to do.
And I would add one last thing,
yes,
which is building relationships and doing good work. There's no substitute for that. And sometimes the only way I knew I was doing a good job is referrals. Because other people would refer me. And so that's a lot of when I realized is that my marketing was really a referral business. Like if I have to do good work, and others will share the word.
And that's a good attitude, I think, to have too, because throughout you speaking, it didn't sound like you valued any one group over another. Like I know that there were some that you said maybe weren't as pleasant, but it sounds like you took the nonprofits maybe just as seriously as the big clients. And I think having that attitude of respecting everyone who you're working with, just for the sake of human dignity, but also you never know who could refer you to what.
Exactly. And don't burn bridges, like I think people can get really, I don't know, like I always had a philosophy that I always felt like I had to and usually I end up just loving my clients. Like I had to like them at some level. And it was all about building those relationships of care and how can I be of help and what can we do to really help move you forward. And as it turns out, I had most of my clients I ended up working with over 10, 15 years. Like they would bring me back over and over again. They would bring me into their new jobs. They would change jobs and they would hire me over there, So it was really a work of building relationships. And I wasn't, for me, my business was not like marketing a product or a process. Some people in my field, their business is, they get known as the expert in this thing and they come in and do that, or they market this process as a product kind of thing. For me, my work was about relationships, like building authentic relationships with people and having a very big toolkit that I could draw from to help in a lot of different kind of situations, and to help people like to get to a place where I could scope out what I could actually deliver, what I thought was really doable for them, and to then really deliver it and to deliver it in the scope and with the resources that we had. Like that's, you know, and if you can't do that, then it's really hard to get referred.
Yeah. I think that's the absolute right attitude to have, you know. I mean, and obviously it worked for you, you know. And I think my last question, which is kind of a big one, but how did your business kind of influence like other areas of your life and your worldview? And then to kind of build on that, if you're comfortable, how does that affect your life now, or what's your purpose now that you're retired? So I guess the first part was, how did this work kind of spill into the rest of your life? I mean, did it sort of influence?
Absolutely. Okay. I think one of the things that I didn't say earlier about what drove me to start a business is that I felt that I had this work life, which was, you know, back in the day, pretty like buttoned up. Like we wore those little bow ties and we had to show up with little suits and be, you know, it's just that kind of work life. And then I had a home life, and it was like, I didn't like the separation of that. I wanted to have one life in which I felt like I was living my values, doing my work, and I wanted the flexibility to be able to drive my kids to school when I needed to, and I wanted that that integrated kind of life. And I think I really did get that. And it wasn't, you know, and there were always trade-offs. I mean, I was always like probably working too much and, you know, trying to figure out how to squeeze all this into, you know, squeeze a lot into a small bag. But I think that where one of the things I loved about my work is that I got to really explore my values and what I thought was really important, and I could keep shifting the work closer and closer towards doing the work that I really cared about. So working with organizations whose missions I cared about was a big part, and I would say the last, you know, for the, you know, a big chunk of my career, I got to do that. Living a sort of reflective life in which I could continuously grow myself and learn. I got to do that. And those are part of my values. Feeling, you know, like showing up in a group and feeling like I could really help people move forward in a direction that was good for them and their organization and the planet. You know, those are the things I cared about, and I got to eventually do that. And I think that now that I'm retired, you know, I'm sort of in another transformational process of, okay, so I have some gifts and some skills, you know, that I have. There's need in the world, and I'm in a different place with that now because I don't have the energy to run the business like I used to at my age. I don't want to do that. I've taken a break, but I feel like there's still needs in the world, and so I'm sort of looking for that sweet spot where, you know, my gifts and my skills and the things that bring me joy and really energize me and the need of the world come together, and then that's where I hope to still contribute, you know. So I still feel that, so it's just, in a way, it's sort of like I don't have a business anymore, but I haven't given up on that and how that shows up, and it's showing up a little differently as I'm, you know, I still do the things that I did in terms of learning and growth and reflection and all of those things that I did when I was working. I'm thinking differently about it now. I'm thinking about, there's a lot of need in the world. Last year I took on a project to fundraise for an organization. That where we, like, through the work I started here, we raised over $20,000, and it just was easy, you know. It wasn't hard to do, but I used all the skills that I had on something totally different, fundraising. I've never done that before, so I'm looking. You know, I think there will be other places where I will still be able to show up I love being able to show up more in my grandkids' life, and in my family is aging and passing on, and I'm able to be there for them. So it's like, it just keeps showing up.
Well, it's all kind of connected. I mean, it sounds like the thing that sort of transcends all stages of this are the ability to reflect, going all the way back to when you were working for HR and it wasn't working, to constantly reflecting in your business, checking in and knowing what your values are and the direction that you want to go. And even now into where does all of this align, valuing that connectivity with where I'm at now. But also the same thing that kind of rang true throughout what you said is that you didn't want to live this, fractured life, and you were able to be there more for your kids now, just as you're able to now be there for your grandkids and your aging family and all of that. And I think that's a really beautiful takeaway, is that, that you took a risk in building this business, and you had to live for a while, very vulnerably with your finances and everything. But then, like you said, you doubled it. You kept building, you kept growing. And even though it might have been hard and scary for a little while, you gave yourself the opportunity to live the life that you wanted to live, not just for your career, but for your family, for yourself, for your purpose. And that's, I think, what my goal is too, because I can relate to not wanting to live a fractured life. I can relate to wanting to be able to be fully present wherever I'm at and feel like I can care for my family just as I, serve the people in my career. So I think you did a beautiful job of explaining that. And
care for yourself.
Yes.
Because I think that's the other journey as we as women have been on, is that in many cases, I know I was sort of raised of the philosophy of sacrifice oneself for everybody else. And I think that's, I actually think that's part of the sort of the disease of our times.
Yeah, I agree.
That we all need to be able to have self-care, good self-care. We need to have time for, quiet and rest and meditation and being outside and physically exercising and doing those things that are good for ourselves and our bodies. And, and I think that's really important too. So.
I agree. And I think making sure that we're in systems that allow for that, because, you'll hear self-care as a buzzword, right? Like, I mean, I've heard it in places of past employment, like, make sure you're taking care of yourself. Well, I'm not really working inside a system that necessarily values my safety or values, that reflection. I'm working inside a system that's maybe asking too much and not valuing me. And it sounds like that's maybe part of what you helped organizations with. And so I think it is really important to your point, to take care of ourselves, but also evaluate, just like you did. Am I in a system that also values my self-care and values the self-care of all of its employees? Or do I maybe need to and if not, can this be fixed? Can this be corrected? And if it can't be corrected, then maybe I need to look somewhere else.
Right. Yeah. And I think a part of that correction is sometimes we think, so like one of the things I discovered when I was in my own situation like this is that when I opted out of the sort of values of that system, and I started living what I thought were my values, I actually was able to do more even in the system, to take more, to have better care of myself in the system, because I chose to opt out of what the system was valuing or not valuing. I had to value it first.
Yeah.
And so that really, so then it got to the point of saying, okay, I have to make this happen, like whether, and if the system is really oppressive to me, then I've got to find another place to be. And but more of the oppression of the system for me oftentimes was just in the misalignment of, like, I don't want to work under that value system. I want to work where we're creating something that aligns with what I care about, and so but I also have to work on finding that alignment inside myself too, so that I don't, because we end up becoming carriers of the system, if you know what I mean. Like we end up carrying that stuff because that's what's all around us. And so finding support systems, finding, ways that we care for ourselves, making those shifts, and it can be a lifetime journey. But I think it's really important.
But worth it. And I'm really glad you took the time to say just caring for yourself too, and making sure that that's a priority. And I agree with what you said, kind of as the pressure, particularly on women, but on people in general, that it's all about sacrifice and kind of just doing things for other people. And to maybe kind of wrap up that idea, I've started to notice something. I've been going through my own transformation in the last couple of years, and the things that have become very important to me are just more reflection, just kind of centering on peace and doing more peaceful things. And for me, what that looks like is being content to be at home, writing, or just sitting in the sun on my patio. I love sitting in the sun and just looking at the trees and the flowers in my backyard. Being in the room without my cell phone, purposely leaving it in another room so I can really look at my kids. I started, taking a dance class 4 years ago, and I've been going consistently, sort of exercising consistently in this class. And I've noticed, my oldest daughter is becoming a teenager, and I'm learning that naturally that results in a little bit of rejection of mom, and it's happened. I don't even know how, but it's happened. But at the same time, I notice the things she puts up in her room, and I notice the things that she's doing. And, after the new year, she had this resolution wall where she talked about, she wrote on there wanting to exercise, and wanting to write certain things. I've seen her writing poetry, and I've seen her starting to eat more like I eat, because I went full vegetarian a couple years ago. But I've always been kind of working to have more of a vegetable-based diet, and I've noticed she, even at 13 years old, is going less for the sugary cereals and stuff, and more for the, if I'm making avocado toast, she asked me to make her some, which is interesting. And so, and even at my dance class, she has to come along now, and she goes and she runs on the treadmill, and she's like, I want to run this many miles, and she's setting goals for herself to run further each time. That's awesome. And I didn't tell her to do any of that, but I've noticed with this, my oldest in particular, that as I've been transforming, she kind of has too. And some of those values of health and peace and creativity and even just self-development and organization, she's sort of naturally kind of taken on. And that's been really beautiful to see, even while it feels like we're at odds with each other, yes. Right? Because I am very much experiencing that mom doesn't know, oh mom, kind of stuff. But I'm seeing her sort of embodying these values that I've kind of started to take on, and that's been encouraging. So all of that is to say that in caring for ourselves, naturally, it kind of spills over into our family. And I've come to see that to be the case, that it's happening in mine. So I'm really glad That's you great. Brought that up. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I haven't asked you about yet?
I don't think so. We've talked about so much, but I mean, there's always more, there's always more things to talk about. But I think I've talked about a lot of the things that when I did some reflecting on your questions that I was hoping, that I could share. So
okay. Well, I am so grateful for you and your story and your time. And I think a lot of the listeners are going to take away so much from this, whether they're trying to start their own business or whether they're trying to help, an organization or just reevaluate what's important to them. So I can't thank you enough for your time.
You're welcome. So happy to do it. It was so fun to have this conversation because then we got to learn more about each other too.
That's true. That's true. It's all sort of connected and valuable. So I agree. I appreciated that too. So I'm just going to say a quick goodbye and thank you to my listeners. I appreciate your time, and I really hope that you maybe listen to this one a couple times just to really let all of the beauty and the gems sort of sink into your awareness, because I'll probably go back and listen to it a couple times too. So thank you again for your time, Ginny. Thank you to my listeners, and I will see you next time.